What is going on, guys? Have3 doing another video, and welcome back to an episode of Umineko When They Cry. Last time we left off, we've officially been on Nokenzima for a single day. It was pouring, and we kind of saw where everyone's at. And yeah, we're just going to continue from here. Surprisingly, no one is dead yet in a murder mystery game, and it's the second day, so I wonder what will happen. Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through a crack in the curtains. Maybe the rain had died down a tiny bit since the previous night. But the thick rain clouds didn't seem like they'd be letting any trace of the morning sun get by. The morning was dim and far from refreshing.
やはり今日いっぱいはやみそうにないか。
お待たせしました、源氏様。
Oh no, it's the emo. Kennen finished checking his appearance and exited the washroom. On their normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have to suffer going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of the family conference. However, unless the typhoon passed today, the relatives' stay on this island would last until tomorrow. Dang it, more work. Kennen thought it would be best to be prepared for the special schedule to last an extra day. The two of them left the guest house, opening their umbrellas. The rose garden had been devastated by the wind and rain on the previous night. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Kennen sighed. You imagine you do all that work and it's for nothing? The two headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Goda and prepare breakfast. Goda was such a perfectionist that he'd probably already woken up and was probably already preparing a breakfast as elegant as glasswork. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Yoshima family mansion was the only thing on Rokenzima, so in the past they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsuhi had ordered the mansion be locked up from the midnight to early morning. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of the servants' morning shift. The task had been given to Genji and Kennen so that Goda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen in the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was still asleep. I mean, look at it. Like, it was bright and lively earlier, now it's dead.
では、朝の仕事を始めよう。
はい。
The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. If the curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain enveloped in faint darkness as though it was still trapped at the previous night. Okay, yeah, now it's better. Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Kennen went around the mansion opening the curtains for one window after another without having to retrace his footsteps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed the front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Goda's prize cooking.
おはようございます。
He tried to greet Goda, who should have been getting breakfast ready, but Goda was nowhere to be. Is he still doing that crossword? The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, but the fans weren't even running. Do we have a disappearance? Though it would have been inexcusable, perhaps Goda had overslept. Even servants are only human. They send sleep in and so up late. In the rare case that such a thing happened, it couldn't be Goda. Like, no. Surely there must be something more sinister, because he would never do that. He was the one being like, hey, I'm the amazing cook. Everyone else here sucks the other day. And make sure the family never realized that anything has gone wrong. Kennen took the receiver of the phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number of the extension line into the servant's sleeping room. He couldn't hear that characteristic sound of a dial tone. Kennen tried picking up the receiver again, but even so, he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. He tried dialing it again, but it had no apparent effect. Could the lightning last night have damaged some machine? No, it's Beatrice! Kennen fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. He gave up trying to wake Goda with the phone and dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily staring up at the ceiling? That vague sense of awakening was put in Natsuhi's usual morning experience. She always slept lightly and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. To Natsuhi, sleep was definitely not a happy thing. When she looked outside, she saw that it was still pouring. If she hadn't seen the tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guests. Urging herself on, she raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. Nice room. No one would torment her as long as she remained inside this room, and her headache wouldn't get any worse here. The room was only the place where she could find peace. So when she left, it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. In that case, wouldn't it be better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Natsuhi's face. She was starting to sound like Kinzo. Though she often complained about Kinzo staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend to everyone else, the truth was that she longed to do the same. Natsuhi gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening of her usual headache. Wonder why she has a headache. When she reached for the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she had hung from it before going to sleep the previous night. It was Maria's charm, which Natsuhi had received from Jessica. Didn't Jessica say something about it having the power to repel magic, telling her to hang it from the doorknob? Maybe it was thanks to that charm that at least this room had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. Yeah, no, wait, hold up. Why would you think that they'd break into your room anyway in the middle of the night?
ジェシカのおかげで少しはゆっくり眠れたということかしら。
And Natsui remembered. That's right, last night I promised Jessica that I'd give her a charm of her own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsui opened a drawer for her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she had treasured when she was a child. Inside there were many small objects that Natsui had thought were valuable at the time. From amidst those he pulled out a red pouch. Inside was a small round mirror about 10 centimeters across. It looked quite old, but the design on the back of the mirror was very ornate, and it felt like something with historical value. At the very least, it seemed much more authentic than the other charm, which looked like a plastic scorpion keychain. She had heard that this was a spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits, and she had been given it specifically by her grandmother when her grandmother's mementos had been disrupted. It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and the malice in the same way it reflected light. A lot of magic talk. It would probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. These people are conspiracy theorists. Just as he was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room.
はい。
おはようございます、奥様。早朝から申し訳ございません。
今行きます。何事ですか？
No servant had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made. Well, yeah, the breakfast isn't getting made. It's horrible. Natsui took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever trouble she was about to hear of. When she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsui tentatively responded.
おはようございます。何かありましたか？
申し訳ございます。昨夜の落雷で電話機器に故障が出たようです。内線電話が普通になっておりますもので、直接の
内線電話が普通？それは面倒になりましたね。修理は可能ですか？
残念ながら故障箇所がわかりません。後で業者を呼んで修理させたいと思います。
ということは、この台風が過ぎるまでは修理不能ということですか？
Perfect for a murder mystery setting. Which honestly, I feel like every horror movie does this, but like it's needed because we live in an age where like you can call, and I know this is like 1980 something, but like back then still you need to do stuff like this. I mean, Higurashi, pretty much the fifth arc was all about using the phone to disguise yourself.
つまり、客人たちの滞在中はずっと普通ということですね。客人たちのお世話に支障は
出ないよう最善を尽くします。
結構です。粗相のないようよろしく頼みます。
Natsuhi let out a small sigh of relief. She had been prepared for the worst, but damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about. Then again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. Natsuhi gave her head a little shake.
朝食の準備は順調ですか？
それがゴーダの姿が見えません。朝食の支度もまだ行われておらず。
なんですって？
That face, it went from being just relatable, tired to... Natsui was indignant. To her, this was a much bigger problem than the phones not working. And despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. Why'd everything go well most of the time and then come to something like this when the relatives were visiting? I feel like that I relate to that. Natsuhi put her hand to her forehead and shook her head.
大方朝寝坊でもしているのでしょう。とにかく誰でもいいから急いで朝食の準備を。
Where? What happened? Natsuhi exited the hall and turned around for a second to close the door to her room. The creepy things she saw there silenced her. What's on her room? It was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers in a reddish black liquid and scratched at the door around the... Hold up! Arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though they tried to force the door with bloody hands.
これは
Okay.
何のいたずらですか。
Okay, yeah, no, Goda's probably dead right now. Okay, hold up. Hold up. How did Genji not notice this when trying to wake her up? And why is he just noticing this now?
悪趣味な。
私も今ここに
And
お
you
伺
said
いして
nothing.
初めて気づき
Apparently
ました。
breakfast was more important than that.
後ほど清掃いたします。
大方、趣味の悪い客人の冗談でしょう。不愉快です。実に不愉快です。
Imagine, like, putting blood on your door and just being like it's a childish prank. Natsuhi had a pretty good idea, but of course there was no proof. So even if she pushed the issue, it would have been just as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsuhi gave the order to have it cleaned and headed off to the pro with a squeak of her heels. Okay. So, if someone tried to get into a room... Oh. When Natsuhi and Genji left the pro, even Hideyoshi were already there. Oh my god, it's the annoying people. Like, seriously, if someone tried to get into your room, and there's like a blood all over your doorknob, wouldn't you be like, oh my god, there's someone trying to kill me, instead of, what a horrible prank, servants clean this up immediately.
おはようございます、皆さん。
おはよう、夏日さん。朝食も合田さんが作るっちゅう話やないか。
Yeah, no, he's nowhere to be found. Apparently, his disappearance is more important than a murderer.
朝から胃袋が大喜びで騒ぎっぱなしなんや。
本家の楽しみは食事くらいがせいぜいですものね。
エヴァさんも朝からご機嫌がよろしいようで何よりです。
With a weary expression, Natsuhi returned to Eva's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Then Kanon jogged in. After bowing an apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told something in a small voice.
カノン、合田はまだ見つからないのですか。
申し訳ございません、奥様。お屋敷内もゲストハウスも回ったのですが、まだ。
He's hiding.
一体どこへ行ったというのです。とりあえず今は合田より朝食の準備が先決です。
Yeah, no, like, you're putting the breakfast over the furniture?
至急対応しなさい。
はい。
Kanon glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but it was uncertain whether or not the words should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself.
奥様、合田だけではありません。旦那様の姿もありません。
Multiple disappearances.
はい。
Well, I know it's just
奥
two,
様
but
より
like,
先に旦那様に朝食の準備がないことをご報告しようと思い。
wait,
真
hold up. What if
相
the
をお伺
bloody
いしたのです
handprint
が、
was
お
one of
姿
them,
は
like,
ありません
trying
でした。
to run? Okay, something definitely bad has happened.
旦那様だけではありません。
Who else is
ルドルフ
missing?
様ご夫妻とローザ様のお姿もありません。
Hold up. Okay, so there's 5 people missing?
ゲストハウスにも屋敷にもですか。
はい。ゲストハウスの部屋にもおられません。
Then where were they? Once he heard that Goda alone was missing, she'd assumed he had slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she'd learned that the several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Pessimistic, whatever. I think I read that wrong. Could last night... Because why optimistic? Could last night's family conference have continued all night up until the present moment? If so, they might have wanted to cool their heads after being stuck in a stuffy room, going out for walks on their own through the rain. That part about cooling their heads really sounded like something Kraus would say. Goda had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. Well, yeah, but that wouldn't explain the blood. He had to understand the preparations for breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conferences continued until this very moment, with an atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to swap out. Yes, that theory would be quite convincing for Natsuhi. She remembered the illusions he'd felt that morning as though the previous night had never ended. When she learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion, she once again took a deep weary breath. After all, the banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on.
大方、庭園のどこか、あるいは海岸の方で愛も変わらず遺
Okay,
産の
then
花とに
search
か
for
く
them.
ゴーダを呼び戻さなくてはいつまでも朝食の準備が整いません。
Oh my god, how dependent are you on this one person for breakfast? And why are you more scared about breakfast?
兄さんたちの話し合いはまだ続いとるんか。
She had planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Natsuhi and managed to grasp the situation.
兄さんもルドルフもタフね。ローザの場合は若さかしら。私たち夕べの24時過ぎにはもう眠くてベッドに戻らせてもらったんだけど、確かにあの時点でもまだ兄さんたちは熱論を交わしてたわ。男って熱くなると嫌ね。
Natsuhi snorted, her face still blank.
カノン、表を探してらっしゃい。ゴーダを見つけたらすぐに戻って朝食の準備をするよう伝えなさい。
かしこまりました。
夏日姉さん、表とは限らないわよ。お父様の書斎ってことはないかしら。
Oh, that's actually a good point.
なるほど。考えられん話やないで。どういう話の流れかはわからんが、お父さんの主催に場所を移してお父さんにも混じってもらって議論を続けてるっちゅう可能性は十分あるやろ。
そのような汚らわしい話題を好んでお父様が書斎へ招き入れることなど考え
Yeah,
ら
no,
れ
that's
ませ
also
ん。
a good point. He wasn't letting anyone in.
あらそう。じゃあ仕方ないわね。源氏さんとカノン君は申し訳ないけど外を探してきてちょうだい。確かに兄さんなら頭を冷やすために外を散歩しようなんて言い出しても不思議はないわ。たとえこんな天気、私はお父様の書斎に行ってくるわ。ひょっとするとそこにいるかもしれないしね。
客人であるエヴァさんにそこまでのご足労はおかけできません。私が行ってきます。朝のご挨拶も兼ねて。
あら、じゃあお願いするわね。でも朝の挨拶を交わしてくれるかは疑わしいわね。夏日姉さんってお父様とは仲よろしかったかしら。
仲が良い
Is
とは
now
分
the
かり
time
かね
for
ません。
this?
後ろ宮家の後
Oh
継ぎ
my
の妻を許
god.
さ
Can
れ
these
るだけ
people
の信
stop
頼を得てい
arguing
ると
for a second?
確信しています。
There is literally missing people and evidence that a murder could have taken place.
ならきっと返事くらいはしてくれるわね。お父様とは朝食くらいご一緒したいの。ぜひ降りてきてくださるよう説得してくれないかしら。私たちはすっかり嫌われちゃってるみたいだけど、そこまで信頼を得ている夏日姉さんの言うことなら聞いてくれそうですもの。そこまで短歌を切ってお父様を説得できず信頼を得ているなんて二度と言えないかもね。
自信はありませんが努力はします。
Natsuhi responded, looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temper, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. Eva was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsuhi wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to come down. But even so, Natsuhi would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible and letting Eva go instead. Eva's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsuhi clench her fists slightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder.
奥様、よろしければこれをお持ちください。
それは
Genji handed Natsuhi a sparkling gold key of ornate design. It was the key to Kinzo's study. The study had an auto lock and couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbade entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door.
でもこの鍵を使ったらあなたも咎めを受けるのではありませんか。
親方様は深くお休みになられている時、それに親方様にお部屋を出ていただくよう説得するにはぜひ
Genji.
Until now, Natsui thought of Genji as a cold servant who wouldn't do anything for her, since he worked directly under Kenzo. But it looked like she would have to alter her understanding of him. She wanted to communicate her gratitude, but by then Genji had already turned his back on her and was walking down the corridor with Cannon. But as Natsui watched them go, the words directed at her from behind were sneering.
じゃあお父様を必ず連れてきてね。息子のかわいい嫁の言うことですもの。きっと聞いてくれるわよ。私たちは客人だからここでのんびりくつろがせてもらうわ。
Yeah, no, I really don't like Eva.
予算かエヴァ、口が過ぎるで。
Hideyoshi is somewhat better. Still, like, kinda okay.
すまんが夏日姉さん、お父さんのことよろしく頼むわ。
Without answering, Natsui forcefully spun on her heels and quickly left that place. We're gonna go back to the guest house. It's been a minute. Yes, we're back in the guest house. I used to think that's the bed. After all the excitement the previous night, there was no way anyone was going to wake up early. George and Nikki, Jessica, and I were snoring loudly on the beds in the cousin's room. But Maria, who had gone straight to bed without joining us, was completely awake. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the other three cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what had happened. Afterwards, she realized that her mother wasn't with her. She quickly got lonely. Maria left the cousin's room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her and her mother. Paying no heed to the three who were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Badawa mumbled and rolled over in his sleep, but it wasn't enough to wake him up. After a while, Maria returned once again, opening the door with a lively bang. Once she had left her room, her face had been sleepy, but now that she was back, she looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Badawa's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping on it like it was a trampoline. Ah, yes, good job, Maria. After making sure I was awake, Maria moved over to George and Nikki's bed and started jumping on that too. And that meant the three of us all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening.
ありがとうマリアちゃん。僕たちは夕べが遅かったから寝坊しちゃったのを起こしてくれたんだね。でももう少しだけ起こし方を優しくしてくれると完璧だったかな。
ジョージ兄さんは本当に大人だよ。尊敬するぜ。
もうすぐ7時なんだな。ま、確かにもう起きてもいい頃だぜ。
ローザおばさんが部屋にいなかったの？もう起きてお屋敷の方に行っちゃったのかな。
Maria kept groaning ooh ooh and looked unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't where she'd expected. If we could just tell her where her mother was, that would alone would probably calm her down. But unfortunately, we had no way of knowing where Aunt Rosa was, except that she wasn't here.
どうせ朝食に行くことになるんだし、屋敷の方に行こうぜ。
そうだな。マリア、一緒に屋敷へ行こうぜ。きっとローザおばさんもそこさ。
ママはお屋敷なら行く。
そうだね。お屋敷に行こうか。多分親たちはもう向こうに行ってるんだよ。
Yes, another friendly chat of the missing breakfast and furniture. Maria regained her usual composure, so completely her earlier tantrum now seemed like a lie. We got dressed, left the room, and headed for the mansion. Ah, yes. Still looks like it's nighttime though, even though in like certain scenes it looks like it's daytime raining. Now it's night raining. Oh. Once more there was a knocking sound on the study door, but there was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still and I could not wake him up. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Eva would probably be amused and triumphant. And even putting Eva aside was problematic that Kinzo had stayed set away during this entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make an appearance. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsui readied herself and used the key that she'd borrowed from Genji to open the door. Even though she was prepared for the sweet stench which seemed to eat into one's brain as it poured out the small crack in the door, she couldn't help but grimace. Thinking that he might still be asleep, Natsuhi entered the room quietly. Once he did, Kinzo was already awoke and looking down at the window.
お目覚めでしたか。おはようございます。
どうやって入ったのか。
Kinzo spoke with his back still facing her. His voice was not harsh but calm, so Natsui was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsui wasn't able to relax.
申し訳ございませんでした。源氏さんにお願いして書斎の鍵をお借りさせていただきました。
ほう、源氏がか。我が友がそれに足ると思ったならば、話を聞かぬわけにもいくまい。して、私に何用か。
はい、もうじき朝食の準備が整いますが、ぜひお父様にもおいでいただきたく思いまして。
朝食はここでとる。いつものように運ばせるがいい。
しかしお父様、年に一度の親族会議です。せめてお顔をお見せになってください。
下に降りて、私の死後、遺産をどのように食いちぎるのかを決める議論に加われ。バカらしい。そのような話は私を抜きで好きに進めるがいい。そしてそれが親族会議だというなら、私がこの部屋を出る。私は忙しいの構うでない。
His last words carried the threat that any further questions would be not appreciated. Natsui realized that adding any further pleas would finally bring his wrath down upon her. She didn't look forward to facing Eva's sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsui could do.
そうですか。わかりました。みんな残念がるでしょうが、そう伝えます。
Natsui decided to give up. Bowing silently, she tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. As he did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle, it felt like it came from an entirely different person.
Natsuhi, Ushiromiyaの家に嫁ぎ、もう随分になるな。
はい、後宮を名乗ることを許されてから、もう随分になります。
前の家が恋しくなることもあるか。
いいえ、嫁ぐとは成果を捨てることです。私は後宮夏日、帰る家も懐かしむ家も、すべてはこの後宮の家のみです。
She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt whenever she applied to the Ushiromia family name to herself, and that's precisely why she was so saddened when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushiromia, leaving her to race about in vain.
クラウスな女で、お前がその夫であったなら、いや、それは言うまい。
それはどういう意味ですか、お父様。
Natsui was shocked. If Kinzo's words just now were what they seemed, it would have been more than enough to make up for all she'd suffered up to that point.
忘れよ、年寄りのざれ言だ。
Kinzo once again faced away from her. He had told her to forget about it, but Natsui couldn't help feeling a warmth in her heart.
お父様、この夏日は血はつながらずともお父様の娘です。後宮家の名誉も栄光も、そしてお父様が残されたものもすべて、この夏日が必ずや守ってみせますから。
お前に片翼のわしをまとう資格はない。しかし、お前の心には確かに片翼のわしが刻まれている。
Okay, that's good. I thought he was like, just like, you don't have the right to be a part of this family.
お前は間違いなく我が血族で、後宮家の栄光を引き継ぐ者だ。お前の衣服にわしがないことを嘲笑う者もいる。しかし、それに耳を貸すことはない。心にわしを持つ者だけが
真の私の血族なのだ。お前を後ろ宮家に迎えられたことを今は光栄に思っている。
Without saying anything more, Kenzo remained with his back to Natsuhi. However, Natsuhi couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her heart she hadn't felt since a long ago when she had been just a child. Natsuhi bowed slowly to his back and left the room.
あら、ちょうどいいタイミングだ。お父様の様子はどう？あんまり遅いから様子を見に来ちゃったのよ。
When Natsuhi left the study, she saw Eva climbing the stairs and their eyes met. Eva was smirking unpleasantly, thinking that Natsuhi would leave grudgingly after failing to convince Kenzo. However, the way Natsuhi was now, such a frivolous laugh would not disturb her. She was not permitted to wear the family crest on her clothing, but she was permitted to wear it in her heart. Aw, how kinda nice. She spoke so calmly, clearly, and confident with the dignity of the one who would protect the Yoshima family's glory.
お父様は親族会議にはおいでにならないそうです。汚らわしい議題に関心はないと仰せです。
とかなんと、お父様を説得できなかったんなら素直にそう言えばいいじゃない。
哀れですね。お父様が嘆かれるお気持ちも分かろうというものです。
それはどういう意味よ。
Natsuhi did not answer. Just as Kenzo had done earlier, she showed Eva her back as she headed down the stairs. Eva finally realized that she was being made fun of, that something had happened to quickly bolster Natsuhi's confidence. Even so, she apparently didn't have the courage to risk Kenzo's wrath. Unable to even knock at the door, she could only click her tongue, make a motion as though scratching at it, and following after Natsuhi.
それで兄さんたちはいたの？お父様に聞いたの？
聞きそびれましたが、書斎の中にはいませんでした。お父様が夫たちの下船な話のために入室を許すこともありえませんから、下に降りて使用人たちが探してくれるのを待ちましょう。朝食は遅れますが、お茶でもいか。
別に結構よ。
Eva couldn't hide her confusion at the complete difference in Natsuhi's attitude. She was acting so boldly, and while Eva hated to admit it, she even had a sense of dignity about her. Unable to find fault with anything, Eva could only follow Natsuhi's back to the pillar. When the two of them returned to the pillar, Hideyoshi had been joined by the 4 children and Nanzo. Gensu, who had been talking with Hideyoshi, reported the current situation when he noticed that Natsumi had returned. I said Natsumi instead of Natsui. Too much Higurashi.
はい、申し訳ございません。あと、熊沢が朝食の準備に入りました。もう少し時間をいただきたいとのことです。
The clock read a little past 8. 8 should have been the time to start breakfast. Normally going over that time limit would be a disgrace to the host.
今、カノンが表を探しています。それから、シャノンの姿も見えます。
Okay, now there's 6 missing people. Great.
シャノンまで？まったく。主人は何を従えて散歩に出かけたのですか？
Just how many people had gone missing by now? Now the number was this large, it's starting to feel truly unpleasant, as though the people here were the only ones being left out of something interesting. And at least there seemed to reflect the feelings of the children, and Maria in particular. She was indignant, her stomach grumbling almost as though her mother and others had left her alone to go off and eat something delicious without her. The other children were flipping through the channels on the television, trying to find a program that might interest Maria and cheer up again. Nanzo was sitting on the sofa, gazing wistfully at the children while reading a book. It must have been a book about chess. The sound of the footsteps came rushing towards them with a pitter-patter. There was only one set, so they realized seeing who it was belonging to was probably Cannon, not Kraus and the rest.
奥様、失礼します。
その様子では見つけられなかったようですね。
申し訳ございません。まだ。
もう十分です。ご苦労をかけました。
She didn't know where they were, but they had to be somewhere on this island. They hadn't had a thing to eat since the previous night, so their stomachs must have been growling about now. They'd probably come plodding back of their own accord before long. By now, Natsuhi was thoroughly exasperated and started to feel that there was no reason for them to go out of their way in search.
私はお客様方にお茶のご用意をしに、二人とも早朝からご苦労様でした。
Natsuhi left the parlor acting as though the release in tension had caused a new surge in her headache. Cannon tried to call her back, but Natsuhi left swiftly.
どうした？まだ何かあるのか？
はい、旦那様方のお姿を見つけることはできませんでしたが、その
Cannon sounded evasive. It looked as though he didn't know where they were, but had spotted something that might be connected to their disappearance. Even Hideyoshi noticed this exchange of words and came over. They'd probably picked up something strange in Cannon's behavior.
どうしたんやカノン君。クラウス兄さんたちは見つかったんか？
実はバラ庭園の倉庫の様子がおかしいのです。
様子がおかしいというのはどういう意味だ？
それが何と説明すればいいのか。
Cannon hesitated once more. His tone wasn't at all what you'd expect from this usually fearless boy. Seeing this, Eva and Hideyoshi looked at each other dubiously.
どういうこと？倉庫の中に兄さんたちがいたんじゃないの？
いえ、中はこれから調べます。その鍵を取りに戻ったところなのですが、
ようわからんが、とにかく中を調べればいいだけの話じゃないか。その倉庫の鍵はどこにあるんや？
使用人室にあります。すぐに中を確かめましょう。
Cannon dashed off to the servant room and returned with the key. Genji left the post, saying that he would go check, but then Eva and Hideyoshi followed after him. What was this something strange about the storehouse that had caused the usually fearless Cannon to hesitate? It was still pouring outside, but perhaps the curiosity over this something that Cannon couldn't talk about won out. While the children made a big fuss watching television, Cannon and the rest dashed over to the entrance. Yo, what's on television? I'm more interested in that than the storehouse or whatever they're doing. The Rose Garden storehouse was a place that housed the various tools used to manage the garden. It was definitely not a pretty building. Because of its appearance, it had been built so that it was hidden in the corner of the Rose Garden. Cannon, Genji, Eva, and Hideyoshi came cutting across the Rose Garden holding umbrellas. They entered a small path just off the Rose Garden, which was normally off limits for those appreciating the garden, and only used by those maintaining it. As they dashed down it, the storehouse came into view in front of them. What? What's off about it? It was quite no exciting compared to the flawlessly perfect beauty of the Rose Garden. It was pretty seedy looking. It was easy to understand why it had been built in a hard to see place. Even Hideyoshi arrived at the storehouse long after Cannon and Genji.
カノン君たちは早いな。わしは心臓が爆発しそうや。
こんなところに倉庫なんか建ててたのね。何よそれ。
What? When Eva looked what Cannon was pointing at, she was at a loss for words. Noticing this, Hideyoshi also followed Cannon's finger and was likewise too shocked to speak. The entrance to the storehouse was kind of a shudder. In there, everyone suddenly realized why Cannon had been unable to find the words to describe what they now saw. On the shutter, which was completely filthy from being exposed to the wind and rain for so long, let me guess, more blood, stuck right onto it. There was something that looked like a strange dark... What is that? Is it like a magic circle? An indescribably eerie shape was drawn on the shutter with some kind of ghastly substance. That's like one of those, like, ritual circles. Wait. Oh. Has Beatrice been revived? No more beating around the bush. Some kind of mark was drawn there, with a ghastly substance that looked like blood, in a shape that seemed to suggest something ominous. 2 circles were drawn there. Inside was a design that looked like a cross. The 4 ends of the cross were widely exaggerated, and it looked like some kind of crust from somewhere around Europe. In the cracks between those shapes, written closely packed together, were some unfamiliar characters, or possibly symbols.
なんちゅう悪趣味な落書きこれ。あれか？悪魔の儀式とかの魔法陣いうやつとちゃうか？
Yeah, it wasn't surprising that Hideyoshi would say that about such a ghastly shape drawn with a deep red, disrupting substance.
これいつ書かれたの？
昨日雨が降り出す前にここに来ましたが、その時には
他の方々の目に触れる前にご覧になられたらご不快になられるだろう。
そうね、ただの倉庫小屋とはいえ、こんな気持ち悪い落書きを1秒たりとも放置したくないわ。
倉庫の中に塗料もあります。応急処置でとりあえず塗り消して、後日天気のいい日に改めて塗装しましょう。
Genji remembered that he had recently seen another scribble and that too had been made with strange dark red substance the same color as this. That must have been... That's right, he had seen on the door to Natsuhi's room.
カノン君、
Oh!
さっさとこの落書きを消して戻りましょう。たとえ倉庫とはいえ、実家の落書きは本当に腹立たしいわ。
はい、すぐに済ませますので。
Hold up. Wait. Are they inside? A boisterous noise was sounded, and the eerie shape drawn on the shutter began to get sucked into the top as the shutter was raised. At least for the time being, that ominous drawing disappeared from their gaze, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. What did they find? Oh my god, of course I cut back. Thanks to a kids program, they came across Maria was feeling much better. Battle and Jessica were poking fun at the kids show at every turn, cackling together. I do that all the time. George was enjoying the program with Maria from her perspective. Nazo sat on the sofa by himself, passing the time reading quietly. They had heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. They were the footsteps of a single person. Did that mean it wasn't the group of four that just left? It was Genji. It was very rare for Genji, who considered being out of breath a violation of a servant's virtues, to be gasping for air. He had probably come dashing back from the outside the mansion. His shoulders were soaking wet and he didn't have his usual trim appearance. When Genji noticed Nanzo looking at him, he gave a small, silent bow and quickly approached him.
Nanjo sensei, 申し訳ございません。至急お越しください。何事ですかな?
What is happening? As Genji whispered something into Nanzo's ear, Nanzo went pale. He rose from the sofa, trying not to be noticed by the children who were still engrossed by the TV, and the two of them rapidly left the parlor, muffling their footsteps. Just as they were about to exit the parlor, they came across Natsuhi, who was pushing a servant cart loaded with tea set. Genji whispered something into Natsuhi's ear, and Natsui went pale too in apparent shock. Then leaving the servant cart where it was, the three of them died. Yeah, no, they're dead, aren't they? George noticed them running down the rose garden through the window.
なんだろう、源氏さんと南條先生と、あれは夏日おばさんかな。
They're all leaving to get tea at the exact same time.
何かあったのかな。ひどい慌てようだったね。
When Jessica Maria saw that Eva, Hideyoshi, and Nanzo were no longer in their seats and the serving cart had been abandoned in the entrance to the parlor, they also realized that something was the matter.
何か事故でもあったとか？
行ってみようぜ。俺たちだけのけ者なんて面白くねえしな。
For some reason, what Battler said sounded extremely indiscreet, but they couldn't deny that they were a little insecure and concerned after seeing their dotes ran off in the rain without regards to their appearance.
行ってみようぜ。何があったか気になるぜ。
Jessica's uneasy words spoke for all of them.
おい、マリア。お前も来るか？それともテレビを見てるか？
マリアはテレビがいい。
僕たちだけで行こう。マリアちゃん、すぐ戻るからね。テレビを見て待ってるんだよ。
It's time to go to the rose garden. By the time the kids made it outside, the adults were no longer in sight, but Jessica seemed to have a pretty good idea where they had gone, judging by the direction they had been running. Following Jessica, we ran through the rain-soaked rose garden. The wind seemed to suddenly get stronger. The malicious sounds of thunder began to ring out like it had the previous night. It felt like an eerie something had surrounded the island and was trying to stop us. Okay, I think we're in Bado's point of view again. It's kind of weird how they do perspective. Like, sometimes you're playing as nobody and sometimes you're as Badoer.
ジェシカ、この先には何があるんだ？
確か園芸道具なんかの倉庫があったはずだぜ。
そんなところに一体何があるんだろうね。
Just as Jessica had said that, they began to see a storehouse in front of them. They could also see the adults there. The shutter to the storehouse was open, and several adults looked as though they were searching for something. For some reason, only Natsuhi was outside the storehouse without even holding an umbrella, and she looked like she was hanging her head and her back from facing them. There was Genji, Nanzo, and Natsuhi who had just left the mansion. The ones who had left earlier, Ken and Eva and Hideyoshi, were also there, making for a small crowd of people. But there was absolutely no bustle of activity. When Natsuhi realized that the children were approaching, a terrible expression rose to her face and she ran at them with her arms spread wide. Yeah, no, there's dead people in there. But despite that, no. Because of that, the kids saw the scene Natsuhi was trying to keep away from them. Inside the storehouse with its shutter wide open, a faint fluorescent light shone down, and right there was... Jessica's piercing shriek ran out, but that was just because Jessica's scream was the loudest. The same thing split out of Battler and George's mouth as well. Eva spread her arms just like Natsuhi, whirling at the kids with a bone-sewing expression on her face.
Georgie! みんなを連れて屋敷に帰っていなさい早く今すぐに
When Natsuhi spread her arms, I thought she was trying to prevent us from advancing any further. But that wasn't why Eva was spreading her arms right now. She was trying to stop us kids from seeing that terrible scene. It was her mother's hurt trying to protect the eyes of the hurts of us children by blocking our view of that terrible scene by at least the width of one of her arms.
何の冗談だってんだこりゃあよ
I'd seen this kind of cheap scene all too often. In manga, TV, anime, movies, I'd seen it over and over again. This was just seeing something appear in real life that I'd seen plenty of times before in some of those more sensational movies, right? That alone shouldn't. With that suit, it's that old bastard's, isn't it? I get it then. That's Uncle Kraus, Kiwi-san, and Aunt Rosa. Ah!
ダメよジェシカ入ってはダメ見てはダメお父さんお父さん
死後硬直をほぼ全身に認められる多分死後6時間以上は経過しとるだろう
Oh my.
損壊部位の状況を見る限り死後に破壊された可能性が高いいやめったなことは言えん私は町医者だ検視は専門外だ
Oh my.
ちゅうことは何や殺しただけじゃ飽き足らずさらにこんな無体なことをしたんや悪魔や悪魔の所業や
Aunt Natsuhi caught Jessica in her arms, and Aunt Eva caught George and Nikki, so I was the only one who could approach the entrance to the storehouse. If only there had been someone there to catch me too. I wouldn't have needed this horrible, evil scene burned into my eyes. No, that's not it. It isn't that there's no one here to catch me. The people who should catch me, they're right there, aren't they? Just as Jessica said, it didn't look like a storehouse for gardening tools. A lawnmower with extra blades, a grass sickle and a hammer, some carpentry tools such as a saw, piled up, plotted. Oh my god, did they get killed with gardening tools? Treated just the same, the corpses of several people had been laid to rest there. No, had been tossed in there. I could tell them by their clothes. That old bastard and Kiwi-san, Uncle Kraus and Aunt Rosa. Beyond that, Goda-san and... Are there still more of them? How many people died? You're fucking kidding me! You can't even count them on one hand! Damn it! I didn't know whether there had been one of these gardening tools which is used for something other than their intended purpose could definitely be wielded like a naked brutality. Or whether some horrible tool had been brought here specifically for this. Anyway, each one of their bodies jammed in here had been given an atrocious makeup. It wasn't makeup, it was more like their faces had been plowed. Their faces were smashed, forced into expressions that normal people couldn't even make. I couldn't tell where the eyes or noses were, but I could find their mouths because they were gaping wide, their gums exposed. But the front teeth were missing, and even cheeks that should have covered all this were all torn up. Oh my god. Oh my god.
親父てめえは絶対地獄行きだとは思ってってもよここまでじゃねえだろここまでひでえ目に遭わされるほどの悪党じゃなかっただろうがだからキリエさんもさこんな男と付き合うのはやめろって言ったんだあんたまでそこまでの目に遭わされる理由は何もねえじゃねえかよ顔がねえ顔がねえよクソクソクソクソ
バトラさんこれ以上見てはいかんこんな姿をお父さんもお母さんもあんたに見せたいわけがお父さんとお母さんのためにもこれ以上見てはいかん
死者ってのは安らかに眠る顔ってやつを拝ませてく顔がねえんだよ。俺の親父とキリエさんの顔がねえんだよ。どういう顔して死んじまったのか。なんだよ俺は。親父たちのことを思い出すときはこのくちゃくちゃの化け物みてえな顔を、そいつクソ親父のニヤニヤとした顔を思い出さなくていいんだからよ。最高だぜ最高だ。でもよ、キリエさんは悪党じゃねえ。たまにはムカつくと思ったけどよ、ちょいとかっこいい俺の姉気分だったお人じゃねえかよ。
I have nothing to say right now.
これねえよ、こんなのってねえよ。クロスおじさんなんかまだマシじゃねえか。顔面じゃなくて側面だぜ。少なくとも顔半分は残ってるじゃねえかよ。
Jessica filled her ears with the sound of her own screaming, trying to set out my reckless words.
よすんだバタラク、もうよすんだ。兄貴兄貴。
Disregarding age and appearance, I fell to my knees, clinging to Aneki's waist, sobbing. It was if I was crying on behalf of everyone there. Representing the feelings of everyone there, I screamed over and over. Okay, oh my god. Okay, yeah, no, definitely murders have happened. Wait, does this update to the character buyout? Oh my god, it does. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Sanen's actually still alive right now. Goda, his corpse was found inside the rose garden. His face seemed to have been smashed. Rosa's face seemed to be smashed. His face seems to be smashed. Okay, yeah, no, they all died the same death. And Kraus only has half of his face smashed. Okay.
倒れているのはクラウスおじさん、ルドルフおじさん、キリエおばさん、ローザおばさん、ゴーダさんで5人。
いや6人や。ここにもう一人おる。
The body Hideyoshi was looking down on now happened to be hidden among the shadow in the mountain range of objects. In a blind spot to George, who stood by the entrance. So George couldn't tell whose body it was. So George cursed himself. He cursed the fact that his worst guesses always turn out to be right.
じゃあお父さんの足元に倒れているのはシャノンなんだね。
ああ、シャノンちゃんや。
George fell completely silent. He shook slowly. Oh my god. Normally would have wanted to run to his beloved's body screaming and crying. However, before rashly running forward, he worked to keep his composure and asked his father.
シャノンもクラウスおじさんたちと同じなのかな。
Hideyoshi deeply understood the meaning of those words, so he couldn't give George an immediate answer. Or rather, he felt that silence was the only sincere and loving response that he could give George right now. When George asked if Sanon was the same, he meant to ask whether her corpse was in the same condition as the others or not. Since Hideyoshi hadn't denied it, it meant her corpse was in the same brutal state.
シャノンを
I'm assuming she just updated to dead too? Yup. Corpse was found inside the rose garden, so I assume that this is her Oh my... Okay. Wait. Well, this is surely interesting. Huh. Servants died. Rosa died. Kraus died. Both Kiri and Rudolf died. And yet these two are alive still. Huh. Okay, yeah, no, they definitely did this.
見てもいいかな。
いや、あかん。
どうして？だってもう二度とシャノンの顔を見られないんだよ。その最後どうして見たらいけないんだよ。
お前が最後にシャノンちゃんに会ったのは昨日か。
うん。
そうか。そのシャノンちゃんは 別れ際にお前にどんな顔を見
How
素
much?
敵な
Okay, yeah, finally. I was about to say, how much
You got
dots was I
that.
gonna have to click through? After he handed her the ring, she hesitated, even though she must have already made up her mind. Then she looked bashful, and ran away because she was embarrassed to let him see her face looking like that. That's the expression that was revived in George's mind.
そうか。ならシャノンちゃんもその
Yeah,
笑
that's
顔
true.
をお前に残したいと願うはずや。
Hideyoshi looked down upon Shannon's body lying at his feet. Just like the other bodies, it was such in a horrible state. Oh my god. Who did this? Well, I already solved that. It's you. You're faking it. The remaining blood soaked half of her expression had been wiped clean. Would that graceful smile of hers have peeked out? But only half of it. Without thinking, Hideyoshi slapped his hands over his eyes. How brutal. If her face was going to be crushed anyway, then if only all it had been crushed, he might have been able to temporarily distract George from pain by making the pathetic suggestion it was someone else wearing Sandon's clothes. But half of her face had been left untouched. It caused the body so much humiliation. Oh my god. Yeah. In there, trying his best to burn the image of the remaining half of Sandon expressing into his eyes as he lay at Hideyoshi's feet, was Cannon. Cannon was not crying. Tears had risen to his eyes, but they did not drip down. That didn't mean he was feeling so much sadness as everyone else. Losing Sandon, who had lived with him since him in the same orphanage, whom he had loved as a sister, must have been just the same as losing a blood relative.
ジョージ、シャノンちゃんはきっとありがとう言ってるぞ。お前に恥ずかしいところを見られとうなかったんきっと。お前が耐えてくれたこと、感謝しとるで。
分かってる。分かってるよ、父さん。分かってるよ。
George leaned against the outside of the wall of the storehouse, crouching down limply.
父さん、頼みがあるんだ。
なんや。
僕の代わりに、シャノンは指に指輪をつけてるかな。
指輪？ちょいと見てみる。
Hideyoshi crouched down. As he did, Cannon silently pointed at one of Sannon's hands.
ああ、あるで。こりゃダイヤの指、クズダイヤとちゃう。なかなかの値打ちもんや。
それはどっちの手のどの指にあるのかな。
と、左手の薬指や。そっか。シャノンちゃん、婚約しとったんか。
Can you not pick this out? Like...
ジョージ、あなた。
Okay, yeah, no, you can tell.
エヴァ、今はそんなん関係ない。シャノンちゃんは男に将来を約束されとったんや。一生を幸せにしちゃると男に言わず、それが誰かは問題とちゃうで。男にそこまで言わしめて、女の本懐やないか。いつこの指輪をもらったんかは知らん。誰が渡したかも知らん。だが、それでも、シャノンちゃんは指輪をもらえたんや。そして、それを受け入れ、左指輪を送った男も、きっと喜んだんとちゃうか？
To most of the people there, Hideyoshi was simply disturbed by the extraordinary situation, and he was blurting out nonsense. However, someone who knew of George and Sannon's true relationship would understand the full meaning of those words.
そっか。ありがとう、父さん。
George stood up. The traces of tears still streaked his face, but his expression had returned to its usual calm one.
行こう、バトラー君。ジェシカちゃん、これ以上、僕たちがここにいると、大人の。
そうだな。
Jessica sniffled once again, showing her face to her mother, who had been holding her the whole time, to let her know she was okay now. When she faced George again, she had once again had her usual expression, although she couldn't smile.
バトラー、しっかり。
Badora kept on crouching in front of his parents' bodies.
すまねえな。がっつり泣いたら落ち着いたぜ。親父の野郎。ちょっと死んじまったくらいでピーピー泣くんじゃねえぜって。ほら。仕方ねえだろ。親が死んだら泣くように。 遺伝子すり込まれちまってたからよ。
Bado's face was still bright red from the tears, but he had at least recovered enough to fake a smile, if only a bitter one.
カノン、お前もこれ以上ここにいてはいけん。子供たちを連れてお屋敷に戻っていなさい。
That's gonna be a conversation and a half to Maria. Maybe she had her own way of grieving, different from battlers. Willing she had to take on the role of responsibility now that her husband was dead. She gave Cannon those orders.
はい、奥様。
Cannon rose silently and turned to face me. His face was pure white, almost as though his own herd had died along with Sannon, and there was no life in his expression. On an ordinary day, if he had been told to guide the children through the beautiful rose garden, Cannon might have led the way. But now there was no distinction between Cannon and the children. They were now just kids about the same age, suffering the pain of losing them close to them. After making sure the children were leaving, Natsuhi started giving orders to Genji.
ケンチ、すぐに警察に連絡しなさい。台風が通り過ぎるまでは来られないでしょうが、どうすればいいか指示を与えてくれる。
わかりました。防災用の無線機がありますので、そ
When
れ
she
で
heard
連
that,
絡します。
Natsuhi remembered. That's right, the phones were out today, weren't they? However, they also had a radio since they couldn't necessarily rely on phones all the time while living on an isolated island. Anyway, they should start by contacting the police and receiving their instructions. Everything else could wait.
ナチョ先生、もうこの場はどうしよう。
残念ながら私には何もできませんな。
わかりました。ゲンジ、せめて主人たちの顔を、このような姿を晒すことは当人に。
はい。
Genji picked up several dried towels from inside the storehouse when Eva stopped him with a slow voice.
ちょっとちょっと。
And I think I'm gonna end here because I've been recording for an hour now. So yeah, first murder, and it's 6. Well, wait, wasn't that like the epitaph or something? Just like 6 people need to be offered as a sacrifice or something? He was chosen by the demon's roulette. He has the right to remain in his ill fortune. I'll get to see you again so I don't feel lonely. How unfortunate. Don't worry, everyone will be revived in the golden way. This is the beginning of everything. Okay, yeah, no, definitely interesting. Theory still stands that it was Eva. I don't know if Hideyoshi's involved. 100% Eva did this. At least that's what I think so far. And I mean, Genji is acting a little too calm. So, yeah, I guess we'll stay tuned and find out. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please make sure to like, subscribe. That's great. Appreciate it. And yeah, see you guys in the next one. Bye.